right, I hope that we're streaming. I can't tell just yet till I get to my phone. So if you're joining us and I'm late, sorry about that. Hopefully we are streaming as we speak. And if not, I'll have to fix it. But I won't know for just a second. So we ask that you bear with us. Oh, there it is. Riverside is live. That's me. And there are several people online watching with me. Okay. Whew. It looks like I got it to work. I was expecting to be able to get this really new fancy program running, and I'd be running this from back there with the webcam and running. Anyways, it was going to be just simply fabulous, and it didn't work. So we are going back to what has worked for a while now. Welcome everybody to, I don't know how many of these I've done now, 6, something like that. And tonight, since we are entering, we're in the midst of Holy Week, and I decided that instead of just kind of continuing with, in chronological order of the sites as I visited them, which is what we had been doing up until now, I decided since we're in the midst of Holy Week, that it'd probably be a smart idea to go ahead and actually jump forward to my time in Jerusalem, because we spent the first couple of days in Jerusalem looking at the events surrounding his birth. Then we went up north to Galilee, where we talked about the events surrounding his ministry up in the north. And then for the last 3 days, we came back down south, and we did the Judah, and which contains Jerusalem and all those areas down there. So that's where he is in that final week of his life, and so that's what I figured we would do today. Let's see if I can get this thing so I can actually, okay, I'm not in a good spot. Mentally, I'm in a good spot. Physically or relationally, I don't know. I hope you can still see me there. I'll find out here in just a second when it shows up on my phone. But this is a picture of Jerusalem from the top of the Mount of Olives. And looking down, it was like, I think this was, we had 3 days left at this point. This full day, the next day, and then the final day when we've spent the whole time looking at the tomb and things like that. So the final week of Jesus' life, he's in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, which we just recently celebrated last Sunday. He starts up here at the top of the Mount of Olives, and he makes his way down, and you can kind of see it's like, we're actually where we are right here. This picture is from the top of Mount Scopus, which is kind of to the north and east a little bit of the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is kind of that direction, straight that way. And we're going to make our way over there, which is what Jesus did, because this area here where Mount Scopus is where Bethphage is, which is where he gets the donkey. And he starts from there, kind of goes along the hillside, the ridge, and then down into the Kidron Valley, back up, and through the Golden Gate, actually, which is now walled up. And we'll talk about that as we go along. And Siri thinks I'm talking to her, but I am not. So if you guys have questions as I'm going along, please ask them, at least if you are on Facebook. I won't be able to see them if you're on YouTube. But if you're on Facebook, ask the questions, and I'll probably see them pop up here, and we can talk about that. But so, so there's the view from Mount Scopus. You can see here is the Dome of the Rock. It's hard to see, but over here you kind of see a grayish dome. That's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Dome of the Rock is not itself a mosque. It is a holy shrine, but the mosque itself that sits on what was the Temple Mount is right over there. That's the Al-Aqsa mosque. But I wanted to give you an idea of what this looked like in Jesus' day. And so, obviously, it's a little bit of a different perspective. I had downloaded the perfect picture at home and then went and forgot to bring it in my slideshow. And so I was scrambling there at the last minute trying to get this one. It's still, you can get an idea, but it's not the same perspective. And so that's kind of a bummer. But just to give you an idea, that, it's like the Dome of the Rock, which sits basically the same place as the Holy of Holies for the temple. It dominates the landscape. It's like everywhere you are, you see this Dome of the Rock. And it seems pretty tall. But see how tall that is right there? That top of that mosque would have reached just the top of the doors of the old temple, the second temple in Jerusalem. And then it went another full 75 feet up there. So it was 150 feet tall, absolutely monstrous. Michael Card was telling me as we stood there and looked off at it, he said, if Herodotus had ever come to Jerusalem, this would have been one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. I guess it was just absolutely amazing. So Jesus starts up in this area, kind of further that way. He's going to ride down and then come through the Golden Gate, which is the only gate on the eastern side of Jerusalem. Now I want to go back real quick, and you can't hardly tell. Right there is where it is. It is now walled up, and it was walled up sometime in the medieval era when the Muslims had control of Jerusalem, because the belief was that when the Messiah comes, he will come from the east, from the Mount of Olives, and he will go through the Golden Gate. So what the Muslims did is they just walled up the Golden Gate and said, you know what? We don't have to worry about it now. There's no way the Messiah can enter into Jerusalem through the Golden Gate because it's not there anymore. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But that's in Jesus' day, that's the gate that he goes through, the gate that now is walled up. Just a different perspective. There's the Golden Gate there. Obviously, the Mount of Olives. Actually, this is a pretty good view from, no, it's probably over here. Anyway, and this right here is the Antonia Fortress, named after Mark Antony. That was King Herod's buddy, and basically the reason that Herod was in charge of this part of the world. And that's where Pilate lived. That's where all of the troops were garrisoned. And they were set up right there so that they could look down into the temple. And if there was ever any trouble, there is a great big ramp that just leads them right down into the temple courts. And they could ride down in there and take care of whatever problem was going on at the time. That's a reverse perspective from the one that I took. So, this is Bethphage. When on Palm Sunday, which was what was called, Preparation Day in the Jewish holy calendar. It was the day that the Jews would go and select their lamb. It was a lot like when we go and pick out a Christmas tree for Christmas, but different. And so, at the Passover feast, the main course is the lamb. And so on this day, I can't remember, it's like the 10th of Nisan or the 9th, 8th. Anyways, it happened on this year, it fell on Sunday. All the Jews would have been going to select their lambs. And on that day, Jesus tells his friends, hey, you guys go and get me a donkey. I'm going to read this. After telling this story, Jesus went on toward Jerusalem, walking ahead of his disciples. As he came to the town of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. Go into that village over there, he told them. As you enter it, you will see a young donkey tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it, bring it here. If anyone asks, why are you untying that colt? Just say, the Lord needs it. So they went and found the colt, just as Jesus had said. And sure enough, as they were untying it, the owners asked them, why are you untying that colt? And the disciples simply replied, "The Lord needs it." So they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. Now, these are small towns, okay? This is not like if you lived in Los Angeles or Kansas City or Eagle River even, and somebody said, "Hey, you know what? Go around the corner there onto 2nd Street, and you'll find a Ford F-150 sitting there with the keys in the ignition. Go ahead and just jump in there and bring it to me. And if the guy asks you, 'Hey, what are you doing with my Ford?' just say, 'The Master needs it,' or 'The Lord needs it." What did he say to tell them? The Lord is in this translation. They would have known who the Lord was, okay? Everybody, he spends all of his time in Bethany. Bethany and Bethphage are right next to each other. He was the most famous Jew in all of Israel at this point in time. And he spends all his time in these two little tiny cities. And the word for Lord there is not necessarily God, but the idea of master. And so when he's called this a lot, and they're not saying you're God, they're saying you're my master, the way that a slave or a servant would say to their master, or you're the teacher. So it's like when the disciples say it's for the Lord, the guys that are there in Bethphage are like, "Oh, okay, it's for Jesus. All right, yeah, go ahead." So they take the donkey, they bring it to Jesus, and he rides on into town. Now, this is that little church that I just showed you. This is the church at Bethphage. Everywhere you go in that part of the world, if there was anything meaningful that happened there, they built a church or a shrine or a monastery or a cathedral or anything that would be just, that would kind of commemorate it. And when you're walking around through there now, it's like this was run by one holy order. There's another church that you will go into that's run by a different holy order. And it just kind of depends. Everybody has their own kind of little piece of it. And this is the church that commemorates where the donkey was picked up. So this is us going in, and you can see our guide up here. David he's going to talk to us about this story with Jesus and the donkey. There's my son Jonathan getting ready to climb into the pews. I wish we sang a song in here, and these medieval cathedrals, especially the little chapels, the sound was just beautiful. It's like they built it they probably built it for chanting, but a cappella chanting. And I think I did get a video of somebody else singing at the church of Gethsemane, and I think we'll get to that tonight. I'll play it for you. But just to give you an idea of what it looked like, I mean, it was just beautiful, and there are pictures all along the walls that are kind of illustrating all of this. These are actually pilgrims from the Middle Ages that are coming to celebrate, but just all over the place there's these pictures. This one's of Jesus actually riding on the donkey. That's one of those, what do they call those? Anyway. So we came out of there, we walked kind of across the ridge to the Mount of Olives, and it's kind of a little bit down the hill. It's part of the same hill system, but you're coming down the hill a little bit. We basically walked the path that Jesus rode on that donkey to go into Jerusalem, except for the last little bit across the Kidron Valley, because there is a massive highway there now, and it would have been incredibly dangerous. But you can see now we're over here where this is the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is kind of over in here now. And so we had been kind of up there, up in that area back, though. And this is a graveyard. I don't know. They are everywhere around Jerusalem, because Jews from the Middle Ages wanted to be buried in Jerusalem. Even if they lived and died in Poland or Spain or Russia or Egypt, wherever they were, they wanted to come back to Jerusalem to be buried, because they had this belief that when the Messiah returned, all Jews would come back to Jerusalem. But if you were dead and buried, you had to tunnel your way. That's what they believed, at least in the Middle Ages. And so they thought, I don't want to tunnel all the way from Spain or Russia or Germany or Poland. And so they would come, and there are, all around Jerusalem, these are graveyards. There are graveyards over here, graveyards down here on both sides of the highway. During the 6-day war between Israel and Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, during that war, when Israel was able to take back the old city of Jerusalem, the Jordanians took all these rocks, all of these, these are like a bunch of bone boxes is what they are. They're called ossuaries. Dumped the bones out and used them as defensive barriers. And they did it, so that they would have defensive barriers, but also because they were sticking it to the Israelis. So there we are. I just kind of zoomed in. It's the same perspective. It's the same place. And there we are. We're kind of walking down. That's our group kind of right there. And so we're now we had gotten to the Mount of Olives. Now we are heading down. And the Golden Gate is going to be probably right behind, anywhere. It's somewhere on this wall, the one that was walled up because the Muslims didn't want the Messiah coming back in. And so down we go, and you can see there's the cemeteries. There's a church over here, really amazing church over on this side. But it was hard to see because of the walls. There's the mosque. You can kind of see it there. And so that'll give you an idea of how big the Temple Mount was. I'm going to show you a map, I think, in a little bit, of Jerusalem from overhead. And the old city of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, took up I want to say a third of the entire city. It was massive. And when we got up there onto the Temple Mount and started looking around, it blew my mind how big it was. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down, the Mount of Olives, which is where I just showed you, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." Now, I don't know about you. If I'm there that day, I'm like telling everybody, "Shh. I want to see that. I want to see the stones cry out." We're going to talk about this a lot more on this weekend on Easter, because I'm going to talk about the correlation between the Passover and Jesus fulfilling the Passover and the Lord's Supper and all of that, and how they kind of come together and the beauty of these fulfilled prophecies. But these songs that the Jews are singing, they are messianic prophecies. And messianic prophecies were prophecies that looked forward to the coming of the Messiah. So just like everybody in America pretty much knows Christmas carols, if I started singing Joy to the World, we could all online and here by myself, and I'm not going to subject you to that, but we could all sing Joy to the World, the Lord has come, let earth receive her King. It's like everybody pretty much knows these songs. And even if you didn't know that one, everybody would know Jingle Bells. It's like they are part of our national consciousness. Same thing here. And so when they start singing these songs, what they're saying is, we believe you are the Messiah. And this is fascinating to me because I mentioned at the beginning of this that it was preparation day when they came and when Jesus came and rode down the Mount of Olives and into Jerusalem. That's the day they selected their lamb. It is also the day that the Jews believed that the Messiah would return to the temple. And so the priests would have all the gates of the temple open. Even the front doors of the holy place would be open. And they would be standing there waiting just in case this happened to be the day when the Messiah returned. And it's that day that Jesus is riding down into the Mount of Olives. Probably very close to this path that we're walking on right here. And one thing that our guide kept pointing out, and that I think is pretty important for all of us to know, and that is that it wasn't all of the Pharisees that Jesus had a problem with. It was just one school of Pharisees, a very small school headed by a guy named Rabbi Shammai that was incredibly ultra-conservative and legalistic and condemning and mean. The rest of the Pharisees, Jesus had more in common with the Pharisees, may have even been a Pharisee. Not the bad kind like we think of, but the good kind. But Nicodemus comes to see him. A man named Simon has him over to his house. And so I always kind of pictured this interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees, where the Pharisees are saying, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." I always thought that was an antagonistic thing, them saying, they shouldn't be singing this to you. But what I'm starting to think more and more now is that these may be Pharisees that are, they like Jesus. But the problem is that as you're coming down the Mount of Olives, and remember, this is the day that they believed the Messiah would come. Believe me, the Romans knew that was the day that they believed that the Messiah would come too. And the Romans are sitting up in the Antonia fortress, and you can't see it now, but it would have been right on, either on this side or on that side of the temple. And remember, here's where the temple itself, the holy place and the holiest of holies, and it would have skied up about that high, about double the height of that. But up over the top of that was the Antonia fortress, where they would have been watching. About 20 years before this, when Jesus was a little boy, a would-be Messiah took this same journey, came down, the people hailed him as the coming Messiah. The Romans came marching out of the Antonia, out of the eastern gate, the Golden Gate, right across the Kidron Valley up there, and massacred everybody that was there. Everybody. And so I'm starting to think that when the Pharisees say, tell them to be quiet, that it's not that they don't like that they're saying that to Jesus. They're like, do you know what's going to happen to us? Do you remember what happened all those years ago? I think this is a video. Yeah, just to give you an idea.
Descending the Mount of Olives.
I don't know if you can hear that.
Into the valley of Jerusalem. In the distance. And the gold dome is where the temple would have been. And it was said that the dome at its very top would have barely reached to the bottom of the doors of the temple.
Crazy. That was amazing. There's that the Golden Gate that's walled up now. You can see it right there. All right, I just pulled back and showed a bigger picture. That's all graveyards there. That's all graveyards. That's all graveyards. They're everywhere. And you can see where the Jordanians broke a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of most of it. But every once in a while, there's one that's still sitting there. It looks like a little sarcophagus almost, but they're called ossuaries. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the tomb. All right, same view. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. And so it's the place, I thought I had picked a different scripture for there, but there's a place in Matthew 23 where Jesus stops, and this was a kind of a flat place, a viewpoint, where they traditionally believe Jesus stopped and made his prophecy over Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who stoned the prophets and killed those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not let me. And so here you have this plaque that's sort of commemorating that. Let me go back to that. Here, I'm having a hard time reading that. Here rings anew the love of God's lament. Mankind made for himself so far from him has strayed. Here now the Savior calleth thee in love. God calleth, calleth, calleth. Repeat and come back home. Or repent and come back home. So that's where they believed. And this is, so the plaque is right there. This is where they believe he stopped and lamented. And there's that golden gate that is currently sealed. And everything in front of that wall is graveyards. Everything. As we get down to the bottom of the Mount of Olives, it's still on the slopes, but then all of a sudden the olive groves come in. And those play an important part for Jesus and his disciples. And so that's where we came from. I turned around and took a picture on up the hill. More graveyards. Coming down the steps towards Gethsemane. There's a church over there, a monastery kind of a thing. And I don't know if you can tell, I took a closer picture. There's pieces of glass and sharpened metal and stuff there. You kind of get an idea. It's there from the days when they worried about Jordanians climbing the walls and harming them. The ancient ancient video cameras surveilling everybody. And so now we're getting down close to, that's the walls of Jerusalem. We're now down into the Kidron Valley, which lies in between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. And so this kind of give you an idea. Oh, I'm going to show you where Gethsemane is now. So that's what happened on Palm Sunday. Now, he did all kinds of things, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, we know that he spent the evening here. It's called the Synecdoche. It's traditionally where the upper room was, where he shared the Last Supper with his disciples. And it's also where his disciples gathered after the crucifixion and huddled and behind a locked door, terrified they were next. It's where they went when it was time for the first day of the church, when they were waiting for what Jesus had promised. And so yeah, that's kind of the traditional place. The house of John Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark. He's the little boy that in Mark, he writes about himself. As they all leave after the Last Supper, he gets up naked, but he wraps a blanket around himself and follows them. And he follows them to Gethsemane. Now, this is the road you would take now. Probably not the way they took back then. They probably went across through the Zion Gate, through the city, past the temple, and then out and into Gethsemane. But just kind of to give you an idea, probably took them about half an hour to walk from the far side of Jerusalem to Gethsemane. But to give you an idea, this is one of the things that blew me away more than anything else about Israel, and that was how much smaller it was than I had always thought. It always loomed so largely in my mind. And I always thought, it's like, I showed you when we were at the Sea of Galilee, it's like you can see across to the other side. It's only like 7 miles across at its widest point. And it's like only like 11 miles long. And so wherever you are, you can look and see every shore of the Sea of Galilee. If you're out on the Sea of Galilee, you are never out of sight of land. Same thing when it came to Gethsemane and Jerusalem. So there's Gethsemane. There's the Golden Gate that I was pointing out to you. It's not far. It probably would have taken 5 minutes once you walked out of the Golden Gate over here to go across the Kidron Valley and back up a little bit under the slopes of the Mount of Olives and to Gethsemane. And that just blew me away. It's like we're sitting there at the Church of Gethsemane and I'm looking across this valley and I'm like, it's just right there. I mean, if you could see Walmart from here, that's probably about how far it is. It's like walking to Walmart from Riverside Community Church. Absolutely blew me away. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples. So, in other words, when he was done here, he left with his disciples, crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. And that's the Garden of Gethsemane. They're 90% sure this is the spot. Now, obviously, it kind of ranges across the entire bottom of the Mount of Olives, but it's not so much a garden that Jesus went to as a Gethsemane is a olive press, and you had to be wealthy to own one. And so most olive farmers would not own their own Gethsemane. There would be one just outside of Jerusalem. There was probably one on the other side of the mountains towards Bethany and Bethphage. There's everywhere you went. I mean, everywhere we went in the southern part of Israel, and even the northern part, there were olive trees. And wherever you were, where there was olive trees, there would be a Gethsemane somewhere. So this isn't unique. It's just unique in that this is the place Jesus would go to be alone with his Father and to kind of pray. And so they go over to the olive groves is basically, it'd probably be a better translation. Better translation would probably say there was a farm, there was a grove where Jesus would go with his disciples. And so you could walk through some of it, but they had most of it kind of fenced off that you couldn't get to. And there, I'm standing in front of the church of Gethsemane, and that's how close the Golden Gate is. And so, yeah, it's like it was a bit of a steep climb, but it's not far at all. This is the entrance to the church of Gethsemane, and you can see, I don't know if you can tell from the picture, the doors look like an olive tree kind of going up. And everywhere you go inside, they're trying to kind of take you on this journey that Jesus would have gone on and his disciples would have gone on that last night. And so there's the doors with the olive branch, the olive tree. Oh, I guess I turned around and took another picture of the lion gate there. You see, they walled that thing up good. They're like, no messiahs are coming through here. And you can see, so there's the top of the dome of the mosque, the dome of the rock. It would have been twice that high. Probably the temple would have gone up to about here and was sheeted in gold, and the white part was this bright white limestone. Josephus said that if the sun shone on it and it reflected at you, you couldn't look at it. It was so bright. There's one of the famous Israeli cats that were everywhere. I think there's a picture of Jonathan petting it a little bit later. There's one of the old olive trees. The oldest olive tree in Gethsemane is about 800, 900 years old. Okay, so none of these trees were there when Jesus was. But still, 800 or 900 years old is pretty old. There's Jonathan petting the cat. That was his favorite part, I think, of Israel, the cats and the food. There's Michael Card standing outside of the doors. And there, kind of a better shot of the olive. It looks like an gnarled olive tree. So you get inside, and they're trying to give you this idea of how, it's night, it's dark, the stars and the trees, and you can kind of see a picture of Jesus kneeling on a rock. They are currently having a worship service in there, and that happened a lot at these churches. Pilgrims, tourists, but they called us pilgrims. We would come into the churches, and they would just go right on along with their worship services. And I think I've got a video of them doing it. I'm going to turn that up so you can hear it better. obviously not talented at that. The people that were at the actual photographers would just, if they saw me, when they would look at my video, they go, ooh. But yeah, you have these pictures. There he is being betrayed. I mean, just beautiful portraits from the Middle Ages. And you can't see it. I think maybe I'm going to have a picture here in a minute. They are all walking and standing around a rock. And it is the rock that they believe, traditionally, was the rock that Jesus prayed on. There's the rooster atop, well, actually, that's from a different church. I don't know why I put that there. This is, okay, there we are. We're back now. I had a couple things out of order. There's the rock. And they have like these crown of thorns all around it. The people would kind of come through and walk past it, and it was gorgeous. Get away from So, I guess chanters would come, like entire churches would come, and the person that was the chanter at their church would take a turn doing this. I guess it is like one of those once-in-a-lifetime things. And so, yeah, there are some beautiful things that we heard. And so this is actually outside of the church, kind of nearby another rock that now scholars think probably is more likely the one that Jesus prayed at than the one that the church is actually built around, which is quite embarrassing, I think, for the people that run the church. But my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt, from Matthew 26:39. And then there's this poem. O Jesus, in deepest night and agony, you spoke these words of trust and surrender to God the Father in Gethsemane. In love and gratitude, I want to say in times of fear and distress, my Father, I do not understand you, but I trust you. And I just thought as I was putting this together today, what a message for all of us right now. Because these are difficult times. And it's like, what do I do? Why does God let this happen? Why? I mean, that's one of the questions that gets asked the most. And ultimately, it's like, I just love that. I do not understand you, but I trust you. Try to live my life according to those words, but sometimes better at it than others. And so I don't know who MB is, but that's obviously the poet that wrote it. There's the oldest olive tree at Gethsemane. It's got a fence around it, and it sits inside of another fenced-off area. So they really don't want you getting at that. You can that's kind of in the middle of the grove, and you can see the fence over here. I'm standing right up against the fence on this side, so that's why you can't see the fence there. Okay, so there's the rock that now a lot of people think maybe is more likely where Jesus went. The church, what they say is that's probably the second time that Jesus, when he came back and he found his disciples sleeping, and he said, "What are you guys doing? Couldn't you just stay?" And then he went back to this rock the second time maybe, or maybe this was the first one. Anyways, so, but this one, pilgrims would come, and I think I've got a video of it. Yeah, okay, watch this. They're kissing it. And they're like the last in a line of about 40 people that all walked by and knelt down and kissed that thing. Now, this is January 25th, probably. January 25th. The first known case of coronavirus in Israel, it turns out, was January 20th, but nobody thought anything about it. At this point in time, everybody on our bus is coughing. We've all got a cough. We've all fought through a low-grade fever. About 10%, maybe 15% of us got so sick that we had to miss 1 or 2 or 3 days. One guy got so sick, he stopped about halfway through the trip, and we never saw him again. And so I wonder if we all had it, because also I think I mentioned this last week in the slideshow. When we were up in Galilee, there was at the same time a tour from South Korea, and we ate dinner at the same time, but big buffets, shoulder to shoulder with these people. When they got back to South Korea, every single one of them tested positive for COVID-19. And so I wonder, because it's like we all got sick. I called it the kennel cough. Everybody in the bus, every single one of us, we'd be driving along. It was like, but it never got, I mean, I fought a little bit of a fever, and then by the morning it broke, and I felt good enough to go. I didn't have to miss any days. Jonathan missed 1 day. Several people missed 2 or 3. But yeah, I think about that now, and I'm like, I'm glad I didn't kiss the rock, because I did go up and touch the rock, and then I immediately went and washed my hands. I was washing my hands before it was cool. And I mean, whether that's the rock or not, it just is amazing to me. That's a picture of Jesus in agony praying on that rock. If it's the right rock or not, who knows? See, nobody cared which rock it was. Nobody cared which cave it was that Jesus was born in, or which house it was that Jesus was born in. Nobody cared about any of that in early Christianity. They venerated Peter's tomb. They venerated Paul's tomb. They venerated the tombs of the apostles. Nobody had any idea where Jesus' tomb was, because he wasn't there anymore. They didn't care. But when Constantine makes Christianity the religion of the empire, and eventually his mom comes to the Holy Land for a pilgrimage, she shows up and she just starts saying to the people, take me to Jesus' tomb. And they're like, that one right there. You know what I mean? They were just, it was good for business. And so they pointed a tomb, and she'd build this little chapel around it, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm going to show pictures from that probably next Wednesday. We'll probably do the cross, maybe get to the tomb on Friday, and then next Tuesday I will show pictures from the Holy Sepulchre. But everywhere she would go, so she comes to Gethsemane. Show me which rock Jesus prayed at. That one, And so everywhere she went, she built a chapel or a church or a shrine of some kind, but they're just never sure. Pictures of the trees. That's the front of the church. It shows Jesus kneeling and getting ready to be arrested, kind of. And there we are, leaving the Church of Gethsemane and heading for, Caiphas' house is where we're going next. But that's the front of the Church of Gethsemane. And that's once we got over to Jerusalem, kind of giving you an idea. That's from the walls of Jerusalem are right behind my back as I take that picture there. This is the church of St. Peter in Gillicante. Is that it? Ah, shoot. The word is Latin for the church of the cock crow, because this is where Jesus was brought from Gethsemane. He's brought to Caiphas' house. Caiphas' house. And this is not Caiphas's house. It's built on top of Caiphas's house. 99% sure this is the place where Jesus is brought for his trial before the Sanhedrin. Caiphas was the high priest, and down below this church is the dungeons where he would have been chained up, and I've got pictures to show you from there. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. And when they get here, this is kind of the spot where, well, I'll show you here in just a second where it was. Let's see. All right, I don't need to see that right now. Okay, this is the ancient urinals inside of the bathroom of St. Peter of the Gallicante. This is so we had already been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at this point. And I will show you next Wednesday probably pictures from there. And as you're standing there and you're looking at this massive cathedral, and it is the place where Jesus was crucified and buried. I always thought that he was crucified at one place and then carried far away to be buried somewhere else. But scholars are 99% sure that the same place, that like he was crucified up on top of this hill, the hill called the Skull, and that his body was taken down and sort of brought down the hill, and that down in the bottom of that hill was this garden tombs. And so you stand there. If you go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you have to stand in line. I called it Christian Disneyland, these sites, where you had to stand in lines for hours in order to get to the place where you could see the thing that you wanted to see. And at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, what you are trying to see is actually inside of the little chapel that Constantine's mom built. So she builds this chapel over the top of the place of the skull, basically, and this garden tomb. It's the same thing. Over the years, I think it's 5 other churches built this massive cathedral over the top. And so 5 different churches own this cathedral, different parts of this cathedral that surrounds this little chapel that is in the middle of the whole Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Anyways, I don't know why I'm getting, that's a rabbit trail. Let's come back outside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for a second. There's this, it's like this big old church building, cathedral, and up kind of on this weird little area, there's this old wooden ladder sitting there. And I don't know if he was kidding, but Michael Card said to me, "See that ladder?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Guess how long that ladder's been there?" And I was like, "I don't know, 2 years?" He goes, "Oh, what did he say? Something like 80 years. And I'm like, "Nah." And he's like, "Yeah." But he is constantly joking around. There's no way to tell if he's serious or not. And so we were all kind of like going, "You really think that was 80 years old?" I mean, it may have even been older than 80 that he was saying it was. I don't remember what it was, but everybody was like, no way. So when we a couple days later, we're walking at this Church of St. Peter's, I see this board laying up against the thing, and so I had to make sure and take a picture. I was showing my buddy who sat in front of me. No, he sat in back of me in the bus. I was like, "You see this board? You know how old this board, you know how long it's been laying up against that Holy Stairs Only sign?" I told him 500 years. And he believed me. All right, this is the path, the road that led to Caiphas' house. These stones are from the 1st century road that led up to Caiphas' house, which means Jesus walked those steps. And they have most of them kind of walled off so that the general public can't get there. But that's the 1st century road. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. So that means they come walking up this road. They bring him into that, it was Caiphas' house, that church building that I showed you, but it looked different back then. But they took him right down to the dungeon, is what they would have done. And then Peter comes following right up behind Jesus. There's that road again. And these steps that they're standing on are the most well preserved. And so they leave a couple of steps there for people to stand on to say, I stood where Jesus walked, and there I am, standing where Jesus walked on the first century stones. Obviously, Jesus is, I probably shouldn't have been smiling, like, this is where Jesus was brought on the night that he was killed, but I couldn't help it. Okay, there's the church. This is the courtyard. I don't know if you can tell this. I think I got a better picture of it. There it is. This is part of the courtyard from Caiphas' house. And so Peter standing around a fire somewhere out in this area when he denies Jesus 3 times. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance, and when some there had kindled the fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. The servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Because they would have had an accent. It'd be like if somebody from Alabama was here with us. And, you'd be like, "Well, surely you were with them. You've got that southern drawl." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word of the Lord spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. And so that's about the spot. We all sat down. It just kind of give you an idea, It's like we would just sit down wherever we were, and our guide would teach. Well, I think it was lunchtime or something. But there's our guide right there. He's not happy. He doesn't like any interruptions. I've told you that before. So he'd stand in there talking, all of a sudden, bong, and he'd be like, but yeah, that's just a picture. It's not the video again. There's the courtyard. We went inside of the church, and we're going to go down into the dungeons. So here we are in the dungeon. They've got a lot of areas kind of plexiglassed off so that you can't get at everything, but you could see some of the stuff. But it's like this is first century. It's like I showed you the steps where Jesus would have walked. This dungeon was there in the first century. Jesus walked on these floors, which floors me. Oh, it's a video. Kind of give you an idea of what it looked like. It's a little dark. Probably weren't electric lights back then. I did it twice. This guy sat in front of me on the bus. John, he was awesome. Him and his wife. I think she might have been sick that day. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. This is what's going on while upstairs the Sanhedrin is arguing the case, right? They're trying to decide what to do with Jesus. And not the whole Sanhedrin. They do it at night because they can stack the jury, so to speak. They can bring only the Pharisees and priests that they want, make sure that they have a quorum, and they can condemn him. And so they're upstairs and they're arguing about what do we do about this. We've got him arrested. He's down there. The guards are beating him up. And then eventually he's brought up to the Sanhedrin to speak for himself. I don't think I've got the scriptures to read you about that. But this is, so where I showed you I was standing before, if you kind of looked, you could see even further down another level of the dungeon. And these people are from another group, and they're standing there and reading one of the Psalms that kind of talks about what Jesus was going to go through. Okay, I don't think that's a very good... Okay, so you can kind of see how these it's leather thongs is what it is, have been tied. There's a hole there, it goes through, there's a hole right there coming through the bottom. So it makes a place where they could put a rope and then tie the prisoner up. So one arm here, one arm there, and they don't know if that's where Jesus was tied up. He was tied up somewhere in that room. So there we are in the courtyard. Me and Jonathan. Another picture of the church. It was a beautiful day. It was cold, but it was a beautiful day. And so we headed for Jerusalem. You'd just be walking along, and all of a sudden you'd see a little niche like that. I'd be like, hey, Jonathan, go stand in there. He was a real good sport. He'd just as soon not have had his picture taken, but he was there. After my heart attack, I was strongly encouraged to take somebody with me, not to go alone to the Holy Land. We had no idea what kind of shape I'd be in. It happened August 14th. I went January 18th, and we had no idea. And so when all of this took place, we were like, well, somebody's got to go with me to make sure that, and Jonathan answered the bell. Okay, so here we are walking outside the walls of Jerusalem. There is the Jaffa Gate. There are, 12, 13, 14 gates or something in the walls of Jerusalem. There's one of those highways that goes by. There's another one right on the other side of that wall. That's the Tower of David, which is weird because it's a Muslim minaret. It's not a Jewish thing. It's not a Christian thing. It is a Muslim thing, but it's called the Tower of David. These walls were not there when Jesus was here. Jerusalem was destroyed and rebuilt something like 22 times over the course of its history. And so where we're walking right there is about 30 feet above where Jesus would have walked. We do end up getting to go down there where they have done some excavating on the last day, and it was amazing. But yeah, these are only about 800 years old. Coming through the Jaffa Gate, give you an idea of what the interior of the old city looks like. Like I said, it was a beautiful day, and I don't think I can see any of the soldiers here. As you would walk through, there would be soldiers just standing there with submachine guns, just kind of, just watching. They looked bored, and you were like, that's interesting. And it was... Everybody on our tour group kind of wondered. They were like, we were all kind of discussing it. In Jerusalem, every single one of the soldiers or the cops, I don't know what they were, security forces, whatever they were, they looked like models that you would come right off the pages of a magazine, both the guys and the ladies. And so we all wondered, because we were in Jerusalem first, and we were like, I wonder if this is the way it is in the whole country. And as we got outside of Jerusalem and went into other parts of the country, we're like, okay, no, they have ordinary looking people too, just like us. We feel a little more comfortable now. But that's a picture of just inside the Jaffa Gate. There I am going, can you believe that I'm inside the Jaffa Gate? That's like it's called the Citadel of David, but like I said, built 800 years ago, 900 years ago. But everything is just ancient over there. Okay, so they released us to go to eat lunch. And this is our first day in the old city. Usually we all ate together. On this day they said, you guys can go and find yourself a place to eat. They always warned you. They were like, be careful where you get out your credit card and use it, because they'll ring up a whole lot more, and then, all this stuff. Be careful. And so they named off like 5 or 6 places where you could go, and it was a trustworthy place. The Armenian Tavern was a place that they mentioned, and Jonathan and I decided, hey, you know what? Let's go and eat at the Armenian Tavern. So here we are walking into, it's just so weird. It's this ancient city. So the rooms, it's not like here where it's like a door opens, you just go right straight in. You got to kind of wind your way around and go down. And so this is us going in. And I'm like, don't break a pot, don't break a pot. That no smoking sign was just a suggestion. Because the guy that owned it was smoking. And so there we sat, right there. I was sitting right there a little later than that. Okay, anyway. These people were people from our group. Did I get a... Yeah, okay. This lady right here, yeah, it's her husband that got sick about halfway through, and we never saw him again. I hope he's okay. But yeah, neat people. So I said, hey, turn around and I'll take your picture. And so then they took ours. A really cool little restaurant. That's what I had. I had kebabs, French fries. Everybody had French fries there. Everywhere you went, I was like, I am home. This is a good place. And then the salads and then the kebabs and stuff. So it was super fun. No, that's not okay, so this is just the roads. The streets of Jerusalem were like this. And the city is built on the side of a mountain. And so the Jaffa Gate was at the highest point of Jerusalem. And it was the gate that was the closest to our hotel. Our hotel was about a 15, 20-minute walk if you walked from the Jaffa Gate. And so as they released us into the old city, what they said was, if you get lost, just keep making your way uphill. And so when you get to a place where you have a choice to which way to turn, look for which way looks the most uphill and just go that way. And so this is from the Jaffa Gate. You can see it just descends and it goes down. Jerusalem is separated into 4 quarters. There's the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Arab quarter, and the Jewish quarter. And I still don't understand everything having to do with that. But when you're in the Christian quarter, it has its own feel. When you're in the Armenian quarter, it has its own feel. This is the Armenian quarter. When you get into the Arab quarter, it has its own feel. And the Jewish quarter has its own feel. The Jewish quarter was the cleanest, the prettiest, the nicest. You felt completely safe everywhere you went in the Jewish quarter. The Armenian quarter was a little sketchy. They were like, hold on to your wallet when you're there. If somebody, like people were always trying to get you to walk up like these dark alleyways with them. They were like, come here, come to my shop. It's right up this dark alley. I'm like, no, I don't think I will. Same thing in, the Arab quarter, nobody ever tried to get us to walk up dark alleys, but it just felt, and they told us, they were like, do not be in the old city after dark unless you're in the Jewish section. Then you're okay. Anywhere else in Jerusalem after dark, you need to be a little bit nervous. So there is the ancient lawnmower that King David used to keep his grass cut. I liked the dog. It was just weird to me that you're in this ancient city where most of the people in there are tourists, pilgrims, but then you'd have these people that are just, they live there. And so like this guy's just out walking his dog. I'm like, what a trip that would be. That's in the Christ Church courtyard. I just thought that was a cool looking tree. That's one of the arrow slits for the on the walls of Jerusalem. defending it. Some more Israeli cats. I think we're getting close to the end of the show, which is, yep, all done. So, yeah, that's Bethphage, the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane, and St. Peter's Church, where Caiphas' house was. Tomorrow, Judy and I today videotaped she's had this idea for doing this lesson on grace-based self-compassion, grace-based self-care. And so she's been working on it, and she and I have been working on it. And so today we did kind of a thing where we filmed ourselves together. That I'm going to show tomorrow night. She didn't want to do it live. I wanted to do it live. She was like, well, she'll tell you why she didn't want to do it live tomorrow night. I think it went well, and she's one of the smartest people I know. So that'll be tomorrow night, 6:30. It'll show. Anybody that wants to, you can watch it then, or afterwards it will be saved. And then Friday, I'll be back. We'll do some more, pictures from Israel, and we'll do the cross and probably the tomb. So, that's it. Stay safe. Be well.